Hey guys, Art13131, and we are still in week 3, and we're talking about assignment 6, which is crumpled paper. So you are to draw crumpled paper. Um, I'll turn down the Santana here a little bit, just a little. What you want to do is take a piece of printer paper, something with outlines, and crumple it up in your hands, and then maybe pull it out a little so it isn't so tightly crumpled, possibly. You'll see from my examples. And then place it on the table with a single light source. And the single light source is coming from either the left or the right, as opposed to straight on or behind. Straight on behind is not going to give you all the shadow side, which is going to create more shape and a three-dimensional appearance when you are drawing with graphite or charcoal. So you really want to have one side or the other with the light coming in with single light source. And so that creates the shadow sides and the lit up sides. This is going to give you your shape when you're shading. Okay, I'm going to show you some examples of that. Also, we're going to talk about the homework, which is a drawing from life and same drawing with your eyes closed. There is a reason for this. Um, because you can draw from your imagination and what you've known before, even without looking at it, slightly. Sometimes these drawings, without looking, after you've seen something for several minutes, maybe 20, 30 minutes, you drew something, or an hour, and now you're going to close your eyes and draw that same image as best you can without looking. You'll be surprised how that turns out. It can be very abstract, which is very cool. Some artists, some students cannot get to abstract drawings because they just don't have the sort of mindset to that. And it's not as easy as you may think for some people, and others it is very easy to get to abstract. In fact, everything they draw is more abstract than realism, and so that's why we're all different, which is a wonderful thing. But this is an experiment, and it's a fun experiment with the homework. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Again, I'm going to show you some images of the crumpled up paper, and here we have it. These are student drawings. They're very well done, in my opinion, and that's why I use them as examples. Uh, as you can see, there's various levels of tone within the crumpled paper. Once you put those tones where they belong in what you're seeing with your single light source, it'll take life. It'll take a three-dimensional appearance and come off the page at you, and that's a very strong drawing. Okay? Anytime you have a lot of contrast between very light tones, very dark tones, and all the tones in between, then you have a very strong drawing because it's creating a three-dimensional appearance on a two-dimensional plane, which is your paper. That is really the crux of it. The whole thing is right there. And that's what you really want to get accomplished when you're showing realism as much as you want to show it, and that is something that's determined by the artist, how much realism is strong for your drawing to get across what you want to say to your viewer. So you have to determine that, and you're getting input from me and critique as to how successful you are actually at that. So this one has a lot of contrast too. It's really totally different than the first one I showed you in different ways. Everybody has a different way of doing this. This has a great contrast here as well, and a very nice cast shadow to the side. But as you can see, this is coming off the paper at you. They gave the whole thing a little bit of a background tone here so that it's not white as paper anywhere, really. except for very small places. You see, that's when you emphasize that very bright area where the light is really shining brightly on your subject. It's few places, but when you do allow for those few places and then have these dark areas, it's great contrast. This is creating a very good three-dimensional appearance for you when you utilize all that contrast. Now this is pretty good. In my opinion, this could have been better if they actually toned in a little smudged in tone in the background rather than leaving it white, because it's kind of distracting to the other tones here. These other lighter tones in the subject matter would have come out a lot better if they had toned in the whole thing back here. So I'm showing you this as a difference to the others, which some are actually toned in the back. Actually, these are not, but they have a cast shadow. This has a cast shadow. It's not a bad drawing. It's just that I'm thinking that it could have been better if they had toned in the background slightly. Some tone that is lighter than any of the tone on your subject matter, especially where it meets with the background, the edges. You want to separate your subject matter with the background. You don't want it to blend in too much, because it's going to get lost in the background. You want it to separate from the background. So that's why you would have a lighter tone if you did a tone back here. But typically now, if this was sitting in the table in front of you, what would be as white as paper back here? Probably nothing, right? Unless there was a piece of paper hanging back there, or maybe the wall was completely white, which is probably not typical either, because most wall that's back there is going to have some sort of nuance from reflected light. It's going to be darker or lighter here and there, slightly, more than just white paper set up like this. So that's why I'm saying to do that. But the drawing itself, the subject matter, does have enough contrast and different tones in it. What I'm wondering about is if this is a strong drawing or not, is all the scratchy sort of marks. It speaks of a scratchy surface. So you're creating a texture that isn't maybe accurate to what your actual subject matter was. But nevertheless, you can utilize that sort of scratchy texture when you want to create something a little more interesting, perhaps. These are very interesting, sort of sophisticated marks that create more interest. So there's a fine line there, too, when you're looking at attracting an audience. If something is so normal and so picturesque, so photogenic, that it is kind of boring or interesting, with your marks in drawing, you can bring up an interest. So that's why, again, this can be a very strong drawing compared to some of the others, which are smoother, but they do depict the surface a little better. So all this is up to you, but you have to make a strong drawing. And then you're going to have to pass that on to your viewer, and maybe you don't hear feedback from your viewer, so that's why I'm giving you feedback as your viewer as to what I think about it. Now, there's always the aspect that you can defend your work. And you can defend your work by saying, well, this is very interesting marks here, aren't they, Professor? And I'm bringing in more than something that's boring, aren't I, Professor? And so, yes, and then we can discuss that. And it's probably true within reason, and I'll point out where you're lacking on that or where the strong parts are. And this is all going to help you develop your work. Okay, so that's been said. We're going to talk about the homework again, which is a drawing from life. This is your choice, but use everything we've been talking about. Shading, background, proportion, everything we've been talking about, put that into your drawing. It's not going to be something that has no shape or no contrast to give it shape. It's going to have the contrast, it's going to have shading, lights and darks, midtones. And then, once you've spent a lot of time on that, you're going to draw it with your eyes closed. Now, don't cheat. Close your eyes and draw as much as you can of that as you remember it. It's an experiment, okay? You're not going to get a bad grade for this necessarily unless you don't do it. If you attempt to do it, you're going to get a good grade. But I want you to experiment fully with it. And so don't cheat yourself. Leave your eyes closed. Draw your subject matter that you were looking at initially with the life drawing, and then we'll see how it turns out. It's a very good experiment, and you'll be surprised at how it turns out. It'll be very abstract. Some people like it better than the actual first drawing, and we'll see about that if you do. All right, so let's get started on those. If you haven't sent me stuff from the first week, second week, get that to me so you don't fall behind, and so I can critique it and give you feedback, and you can work on it a little more if that's what I find you should do. All right, very good. We'll talk with you next week.